My name is Jennie Miller. I'm 42 years old. And this is the story of how I stood beside my husband for 20 years, only to find out he was preparing to erase me from our life together. It happened on a Tuesday. Portland was quiet that morning, cloaked in a veil of mist, and the evergreens behind our house swayed gently like they knew something I didn't. I had just brewed a pot of Earl Grey and curled up in the kitchen window seat when I saw it again, an envelope. White, elegant, simple. My name written in looping cursive I didn't recognize. It had been there for days, placed carefully between the mail, but something about it unnerved me. I should have thrown it away. I should have trusted that uneasy feeling. But I opened it. And the moment I did, I destroyed the illusion of the life I thought I was living. The scent hit first, luxurious perfume. Not mine. Not familiar. Bold. Feminine. And far too personal. Then came the first line. Hello, Jennie. We've never met, but I know your husband very well. Her name was Camille. And she knew everything about my husband Ethan. Because she had been with him. For over a year. As I read the letter, I couldn't breathe. Camille spoke like a woman who had nothing to lose, like she'd already won. She described where she met Ethan, at a medical conference in Seattle. She wrote about how he removed his wedding ring before approaching her. How he introduced himself as single. How they spent nights at resorts that Ethan told me were work retreats. I dropped the letter. The teacup in my hand slipped and shattered on the floor. Hot liquid splashed across my legs, but I didn't flinch. My hands trembled as I picked the letter back up. I needed to know how deep this betrayal ran. She detailed gifts, trips, kisses in Paris, even a night at the exact hotel Ethan and I had once stayed in on our 10th anniversary. I remember him saying it felt different the second time he visited. Now I knew why. She ended the letter with words so arrogant, so polished, that they felt like poison. I'm not trying to hurt you, Jennie. I just think you deserve to know. He doesn't deserve you, or me. I sat in stunned silence. For 20 years, I had cooked his meals, celebrated his victories, tended to him through every crisis. I had delayed my own career plans when he started his residency. I played the perfect wife, the supportive partner. I was the one who bought groceries, watered his plants at the hospital, and threw birthday dinners he often missed. And now, I wasn't even worth honesty. My first instinct was to scream, to call him, to demand answers. But instead, I did nothing. I sat there, letting the storm build inside me. I knew Ethan. If I confronted him now, he'd twist it. He'd charm his way out, make it sound like a misunderstanding. So I stayed quiet. But I started watching. That night, he came home late. Again. Said he'd been called into a late consult and collapsed into bed beside me like nothing had changed. I lay there, eyes open, watching the ceiling fan spin. I wasn't beside my husband anymore. I was beside a stranger. Over the next few days, I gathered pieces. His receipts. Credit card charges. I pulled old hotel confirmations from our shared inbox, only they weren't addressed to both of us. One was a romantic resort for two. But I hadn't been there. And then came the moment I made a decision. I would not break down quietly. Ethan had planned a massive celebration for our 20th anniversary, a lavish ballroom event with over 100 guests. He said he wanted to honor the woman who stood beside him. I now understood it for what it was, his farewell performance before the divorce. Camille's letter had revealed that too. He planned to set us both free after the party. But I wasn't going to wait to be set free. I called my oldest friend Olivia. She was one of the few people Ethan hadn't pushed away. When she heard the truth, she was silent for a long time. Then she whispered, "Whatever you need, I'm in." That week, I contacted Robert Keller, an old colleague and lawyer. I showed him the letter, the evidence, the financial transactions. His face turned grim as he flipped through the folder. "He's hiding money," Robert said. "And this letter? This will be more powerful than you think. If he's making moves behind your back, we can stop him." I nodded. My heart was shattered, but my mind was sharper than ever. I wasn't going to let Ethan walk away clean. I was going to let him walk right into the party he thought he controlled, and reveal his lies in front of everyone he admired. The days leading up to the party felt like a silent war. Ethan moved through the house like nothing had changed, still leaving his shoes in the hallway, still pecking my cheek as he left for work, still rehearsing his speech for our anniversary as though he hadn't built that entire narrative on betrayal. But I had changed. Behind my polite smiles and quiet nods, I was gathering my army. Robert and his forensic accountant uncovered everything: offshore transfers, a secret trust with Camille listed as a silent beneficiary, and plans to reroute the deed of our shared home under his name. He was already making moves to erase me. The man I married had turned into a surgeon not just of brains, but of clean, cruel removals. And I was next on his table. So I decided to become the scalpel. Olivia brought me everything I needed: a videographer she trusted, discreet and experienced, and a photographer who could capture raw emotion without being obvious. I gave them a list of shots to take: Ethan's speech, the moment I stood up, the faces of our guests. I wanted every reaction immortalized. My quiet revenge wasn't just personal. It would become evidence. Art. Proof that silence was never my weakness, it was my warning. The night before the event, I laid everything out on the dining table: the receipts, photos, bank logs, the printed emails from Camille. Yes, she was arrogant enough to forward me her old messages with Ethan. I arranged them into folders marked presentation, legal, and personal closure. That last one was for me. I stared at the last folder, fingers trembling. This one held a photo of me and Ethan at our 10th anniversary. We were laughing. He had held me so tightly that night I thought we'd never break. But he had broken us long before that smile faded. The next morning, Portland was overcast, as if the sky knew what I was about to do. I dressed in the same navy blue gown Ethan loved, the one he once called the color of loyalty. The irony nearly made me laugh. Ethan, ever the showman, picked out his favorite tuxedo. "Tonight's going to be special," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "Yes," I replied. "The most unforgettable night of our lives." At the Hilton, the ballroom glowed with candlelight and gold. Chandeliers sparkled like they blessed the event. Guests arrived in waves: doctors, hospital executives, distant relatives, friends who only knew our marriage from Facebook. And then I saw her. Camille. She wore a champagne-colored dress and that same smug expression from her letter. She hovered near the champagne bar, eyes scanning the room. She didn't see me right away. But when she did, her smile faltered. I nodded gently. "You came. Good." I waited. I let Ethan bask in it. Let him give his speech, elegant, poised, filled with clichés about love, commitment, and shared sacrifice. Everyone clapped. A few even wiped tears. And then, Olivia gave me the signal. The lights dimmed. I stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. The applause faded, replaced by confused silence. Even Ethan looked puzzled. He hadn't planned this part. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate our 20th anniversary," I began, my voice calm but carrying enough weight to hush the room. "But tonight, I need to share something else. Something I didn't expect to discover, but can no longer keep inside." I pressed the remote. The projector screen behind me lit up. Slide 1, a hotel receipt from Seattle, matching the date Ethan told me he was on call. It showed a room for two. Paid in full. Slide 2, a bank transfer from our joint account to a private card account in Camille's name. Slide 3, Camille's letter, enlarged, her words bold on the screen: "He doesn't deserve you, or me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone audibly whispered, "Oh my God." I heard glass shatter. Camille backed toward the exit. Olivia's camera caught everything. I continued, "This is what I received 3 weeks ago. This is who my husband has become. A man who planned this event not as a celebration, but as a final performance before he divorced me in secret." I turned to Ethan. His face was chalk white. "You planned to humiliate me quietly. I just made it public." He tried to interrupt, stammering, "Jennie, please, let's talk." "No. You talked for 20 years. I listened. I built this life while you built a second one. I gave you my loyalty, my patience, my everything, and you gave your heart to someone else. I removed my wedding ring and placed it on the podium. You once said I was your anchor. Turns out I was your alibi." The guests remained frozen. Some turned their heads away from Ethan. Others stared, eyes wide with disbelief. I looked back at Camille. She was gone. The lights came back on, but the party was over. I stepped down from the stage as Ethan stood in stunned silence. 150 people had just watched the perfect couple collapse. And I had never felt more powerful. Outside the ballroom, Portland's air was brisk, the kind that cut through silken memory. Olivia caught up with me first, gently placing a shawl over my shoulders as we stepped into the chill night. Her eyes were wide but proud. She didn't speak at first, she didn't need to. She'd watched the whole thing unfold like a scene from a stage play, except it was real, raw, and irreversible. "Jennie," she finally whispered, as we reached the curb where her car waited. "You didn't just take him down. You took your soul back." I smiled faintly. "Then why do I feel so empty?" "Because endings always feel like that. Even when they're the right ones." The Hilton glowed behind us, but it was dimmer now, like the night had swallowed its grand illusions. I didn't look back. Inside, I imagined Ethan standing in a corner, surrounded by whispers and wide eyes, colleagues avoiding his gaze, sponsors questioning his ethics, friends realizing the man they admired had always been playing them. But I wasn't thinking about Ethan anymore. I was thinking about me. The woman who had bent backwards so far to make a marriage work that she forgot she had a spine. Now, I remembered. The next morning, I woke in Olivia's guest bedroom. The air was still, my body sore from adrenaline, my eyes heavy with the kind of sleep you get after a storm passes. And for the first time in years, Ethan wasn't the first thing on my mind. I made coffee black, no sugar, and sat by the window in Olivia's small kitchen, staring at the quiet trees outside. The sunlight filtered in softly, touching the floor like a promise. I had no ring, no husband, and no more lies to decipher. It felt good. Later that afternoon, I received a call from Robert Keller. "Jennie, I just got off the phone with Ethan's lawyer," he said calmly. "He's stunned, embarrassed, and very, very quiet. Which means we've got leverage. All of it." I leaned back in the chair. "What does he want?" "Peace, I think. But more than that, he wants silence. He's asking if you'd consider settling quietly. No interviews, no press, no lawsuit." I laughed. "He wants me to stay quiet after what he did. He knows your story is compelling, powerful, and dangerous to him. But here's the best part. We've frozen his hidden accounts. The trust fund? It's now under legal investigation. Camille's name on the beneficiary list? Illegally added. He's in real trouble, Jennie." I didn't smile. Not yet. But something inside me began to thaw. "Send him my terms," I said. "And make it clear, I'm not afraid of the truth anymore." Over the next few days, word spread. Hospital board members whispered. Department chairs began distancing themselves from Ethan. Patients began requesting transfers. He wasn't just a disgraced husband now, he was a liability. Claire Bennett, the neurology department chair, sent me an email that nearly made me cry. Jennie, you were never just Ethan's wife. You were our backbone, quiet but constant. Thank you for having the courage so many of us never could. The hospital is launching an internal ethics investigation. And if you ever want to speak publicly, I'll stand beside you. I didn't know what I'd do with that yet. But knowing someone like Claire had my back gave me a kind of strength I hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to call. Once. Twice. Then he sent a message, "Please, Jennie. Let's talk." I didn't mean for it to go this way. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Talking was what had gotten me into this mess. Listening too. I was done with both. Camille, for her part, had vanished. I heard through Olivia, who had a cousin at the hospital, that she'd resigned 2 days after the party. No forwarding address. No goodbye email. Just silence. Good. She got to walk away from the wreckage she helped create. But I would rebuild from it. 1 week later, I stood at the threshold of our house, my house now. Ethan had officially signed over the deed, along with 65% of our joint assets. He didn't even fight the divorce. His lawyer simply said, "Mr. Miller accepts your terms in full." Funny how quickly people cave when their image starts to crack. I walked room to room, barefoot, tracing the lines of the home I had once built for someone else's dreams. Now, it was mine. I stripped the walls of old photos, boxed up keepsakes, and cleaned out the closet where his clothes had once taken up too much space. And then I sat down at my desk. Not to cry. Not to relive it. But to write. It started with a blog post, how I took my life back in a ballroom full of liars. Olivia shared it. Her friends shared it. Then a publisher emailed me. Then another. And then, an invitation to speak at a women's empowerment conference in Seattle. I almost laughed. Seattle. Where he met her. Where it began. And now, where I would speak my truth out loud. Seattle. I stood just outside the grand entrance of the Washington Convention Center, the rain lightly misting the sidewalk like a quiet baptism. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the city where Ethan first slipped off his wedding ring and told another woman he was free. Now, I was here to tell a room full of strangers how I set myself free. Inside, hundreds of women filled the seats, chatting softly as the speakers were introduced. I sat backstage, adjusting the mic clip to my lapel, palms sweaty but spirit calm. Olivia was seated in the second row, right where I could see her. She gave me a thumbs up. The announcer called my name. Jennie Miller, writer, advocate, survivor. I stepped out, heels echoing softly against the wooden stage. At first, I couldn't speak. My eyes scanned the crowd, faces of all colors, all ages. Some young, with fresh pain. Some older, with battle scars in their eyes. And then I found my voice. "Hi, my name is Jennie Miller," I began. I was married for 20 years to a man the world called brilliant. But it took me 2 decades to realize that brilliance can hide rot, and that sometimes the strongest thing you'll ever do is walk away from the life you spent years building. I told them everything, about the letter, the party, the evidence, the silence I weaponized. I spoke not from vengeance, but from the deep, bruised place that learns to heal only after breaking. People cried. Others clapped softly. And by the end, when I said, "I don't want pity, I want women to know they don't have to burn down to keep someone else warm," the entire room stood up. That standing ovation was not for what I lost, it was for what I reclaimed. After the conference, I sat at a small cafe in Pike Place Market, staring out over the bay. The sky had cleared. My phone buzzed, it was Robert. "Jennie," he said, "I just wanted to let you know, the court finalized everything this morning. You're officially divorced. And Ethan's medical board is moving forward with their ethics hearing. Word is, he may lose his hospital privileges." I thanked him quietly. No gloating. Just relief. I didn't need to see Ethan fall. I just needed him out of my story. I looked out at the water and whispered to myself, it's over. But really, it wasn't an end. It was a beginning. In the following weeks, my story went viral. The blog post racked up over 2 million views. Women from across the world messaged me. Some told me I gave them the courage to leave. Others just thanked me for saying what they couldn't. I began writing more. My pieces weren't just about betrayal, they were about identity. About rediscovering the self you've silenced for the sake of peace. About how love doesn't have to mean sacrifice if that sacrifice is your soul. One day, a publishing house called. They wanted to turn my essays into a book. We titled it, The Last Anniversary, A Woman's Guide to Leaving with Dignity. It climbed charts faster than I could follow. At my first book signing in Portland, the line wrapped around the bookstore. Olivia sat beside me, eyes wide in disbelief. Jennie, she said, you're becoming a movement. No, I replied. I'm just finally becoming myself. And yet, life has a strange way of circling back. About 3 months after the party, I received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten. Elegant. No return address. At first, I froze. Camille. I nearly tossed it, but my curiosity won. Inside was a single sheet. Jennie. I saw the video. I saw you speak. You were right, I had no business being in your life. I never should have believed what he told me. He said you were cold. Distant. That he stayed for pity. But when I saw you stand on that stage, I saw who you really are. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just understanding. I lost him too, but I think you lost something much greater. Yourself. I'm glad you found her again. See. I didn't cry. I didn't write back. Because in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Camille hadn't stolen Ethan. He'd always been available to anyone who made him feel powerful. He didn't betray me because of her. He betrayed me because he never valued who I was when no one was watching. And now? Now I live in a smaller house, mine. Just me and a few shelves filled with books and notebooks. No more grand halls, no more pretending. I've returned to teaching creative writing part-time at the local community college. My students don't know my full story, just that I speak with conviction and refuse to let anyone interrupt me. I get coffee every Thursday with Olivia. I walk in the rain again without flinching. And sometimes, late at night, I lie in bed, listening to jazz. Not because it reminds me of anything, but because it reminds me of nothing. It's mine again. The first snowfall came early that year. It dusted the pines behind my home like powdered sugar, and for the first time in years, I didn't watch the flakes fall while wondering if Ethan would come home. I watched them for what they were, quiet, fleeting, and beautiful in their independence. Just like me. A few weeks after the book launch, I was invited to speak at a university panel on rebuilding after betrayal. I almost declined. But something inside me, maybe the part that remembered what it was like to sit quietly and nod while being erased, said, say yes. When I arrived, the moderator greeted me with a smile that lingered. We're honored to have you here, Jennie. Your story has become iconic. Real. Real. That word meant more than they knew. Because betrayal didn't make me real. What I did with it did. During the panel, someone from the audience asked, what was the hardest part, discovering the affair, exposing him, or moving on? I paused. Then said softly, it wasn't the affair. It wasn't even the lie. It was realizing I had disappeared into someone else's dream and called it love. The room went still. You could hear hearts cracking open. Afterward, a young woman, barely 25, came up to me in tears. My fiancé's like your husband. Not cheating, I think. But he makes me feel invisible. I looked at her gently. Sweetheart, the absence of cheating doesn't mean the presence of love. She nodded, her eyes filling. Thank you for reminding me I'm not crazy. You're not, I said. You're just waking up. Back in Portland, life had started to take shape again. Not in some glamorous way. Not with fireworks or dramatic rebounds. But with small, powerful routines. Morning tea on the porch. An old quilt wrapped around my shoulders. Poetry books I hadn't touched in years, now marked with fresh sticky notes. I found joy in the mundane, because for so long, my life had been so loud with lies that silence now felt like healing. Olivia and I laughed more. We'd meet every Sunday at a little cafe in Alberta Arts District and split a cinnamon roll while people watching. One morning, she said, "You know, you've changed." I looked up. How? You used to ask before you spoke. Now you just say it. Like you don't need permission anymore. I smiled. Because I don't. And then, out of nowhere, she said, "Would you ever date again?" I blinked. Truth? I hadn't thought about it. For 2 decades, my identity was Ethan's wife. I didn't know how to be Jennie, the woman who loves again. But I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I might, I said slowly. If the silence between us feels better than being alone. Olivia grinned. That's the best standard I've ever heard. And then came the unexpected. I was cleaning out the attic one rainy evening, sorting through a box labeled Christmas decorations, when I found a journal, mine, from my early 20s. Before Ethan. Before neurosurgery dinners and late-night excuses and perfume that wasn't mine. I flipped it open. Page after page filled with dreams I'd forgotten, travel, painting, a short story collection I wanted to publish. I sat down right there on the attic floor and laughed softly. God, Jennie. You used to be a whole person before him. I turned the last page, and there it was. A quote I'd written, underlined twice. You don't need to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. It wasn't new. But seeing it in my own handwriting, from a version of me untouched by betrayal, hit different. That night, I poured a glass of wine and pulled out my laptop. A new document. A new title. Book 2, The Woman I Left Behind. Because I wasn't just writing for women who had been betrayed. I was writing for the girl I used to be. A few days later, a letter came. From the hospital board. They had completed their internal investigation. Dr. Ethan Miller's license was suspended indefinitely. The letter was cold, factual, emotionless. But it hit me harder than I expected. Not because I mourned his career. But because I had once believed in his hands. His talent. His future. I had believed in him. Now, I just felt sorry. Sorry that he had traded something so rare, unconditional loyalty, for a fleeting fantasy. He had a partner who would have stood by him through anything. But he chose to burn that bridge. And now, he was standing in the ashes. Alone. As he should be. A week before Christmas, Olivia brought over an old dusty record player from her storage unit. Figured it's time you had a soundtrack again, she smiled, setting it down beside the fireplace. We played an old jazz record, the same kind Ethan once found too slow. But now, the horns and soft piano felt like old friends I hadn't seen in years. I sat there in my living room, fire crackling, music humming, and I realized something. I wasn't just healing. I was blooming. I had found the parts of me that had been buried beneath someone else's idea of love. And now, one snowfall, one word, one song at a time, I was writing my life again. This time, in my own handwriting. Winter deepened in Portland, wrapping the city in gray skies and warm scarves. I used to hate this time of year, the endless drizzle, the dark afternoons, the way the cold seemed to seep into the bones of our house. But this year, I didn't feel trapped in it. I felt awake. Each morning I woke to the soft patter of rain on the windows, brewed a cup of chai, and opened my laptop. Not to check Ethan's schedule, or respond to hospital event invites, but to write. The second book was coming to life faster than I expected. And every chapter felt like stitching a wound closed. It wasn't about Ethan anymore, it was about rediscovery. My own resurrection. One night, I received an email from the literary agent who had helped with my first book. Subject: an offer you might want to see. I clicked it. A major streaming service wanted to adapt my story. My story. They were offering a six-figure deal for a limited drama series, based on The Last Anniversary. They wanted a female director. A diverse writer's room. They wanted it to be authentic. Raw. I stared at the screen in disbelief, blinking back tears. For 20 years, I had been Mrs. Ethan Miller. Now, I was Jennie. Just Jennie. And they wanted to tell my story. I called Olivia immediately. "Live," I whispered, voice shaking, "they're making a show. About me." She screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away. "You better let me cast your part," she laughed, breathless. "But only if I get to play myself." I grinned, wiping my eyes. "Of course. I wouldn't survive season 1 without you." As the deal moved forward, so did my piece. I started painting again. Just watercolors, soft strokes, gentle blends. Things that made me feel like I was pouring color back into the corners Ethan had dulled. One afternoon, while shopping at a local bookstore, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, Nathan Morales, an old friend from my early editing days. He was taller now, with a salt and pepper beard and warm hazel eyes. "Jennie," he asked, clearly surprised. "I almost didn't recognize you." I smiled. "That makes two of us. I barely recognize myself lately." We ended up grabbing coffee around the corner. It felt easy, like breathing. We talked about books, about the Portland rain, about heartbreak and healing. I told him the basics, skipped the scandal, just said, I had to walk away from someone I used to love. I didn't realize I'd been gone too. He nodded. Sometimes we're the last to know we're lost. I looked at him, that quiet understanding in his eyes. And for the first time, I felt seen. Not as someone's wife. Not as someone who survived betrayal. Just as Jennie. Later that night, I sat on my porch, wrapped in a thick cardigan, staring up at the night sky. No stars, just clouds. But I didn't mind. I used to dread silence. Now, I craved it. The next morning, I woke to a handwritten letter on my doorstep. There was no name, just a seal I recognized from the hospital. It was from Claire Bennett, the neurology department chair. "Jennie, I wanted you to know, Ethan has officially resigned from the hospital. His license was suspended, but he left before the ethics board could finish the review. He said he needed time to reflect. No one threw him a goodbye party. No one even spoke his name today. It's like he vanished. But you? People talk about you. They talk about your courage, your grace. You've inspired more people than you know. Myself included. Sincerely, Claire." I folded the letter, held it in my lap, and let the weight of it settle. Ethan was gone. Not just from my life, but from the pedestal he once stood on. And I hadn't lifted a single hand in vengeance. I'd simply told the truth. A few days later, I hosted my first small gathering at my new house. 10 women. Friends. Fellow writers. Some I knew. Some were new. All of us had one thing in common. We had once made ourselves small for someone else's comfort. I stood in front of the fireplace, holding a glass of red wine. I used to think healing meant forgetting, I told them. Now I know it means remembering, on your own terms. We toasted. That night, as I cleaned up the dishes, Olivia stayed behind to help. She paused in the doorway, drying her hands with a dish towel. "Do you ever miss him?" she asked gently. I thought about it. The way Ethan used to trace lazy circles on my back when we watched movies. How he'd leave me little notes on my tea mug during his residency. The way he once cried when I told him we might not be able to have children. "Yes," I said finally. "But I don't miss who he is now. I miss who I thought he was." "There's a difference." Olivia nodded slowly. "That's the kind of clarity people spend decades searching for." I smiled. "Took me 2 decades and a betrayal. But I found it." The day the divorce paperwork arrived stamped and finalized, I didn't cry. I didn't drink. I didn't even tell anyone for hours. I just lit a candle, opened a fresh journal, and wrote one sentence. "This chapter is closed, not with a bang, but with a blessing." Then I closed the journal. And danced barefoot through the living room to Billie Holiday. Because healing doesn't always look like stillness. Sometimes, it looks like movement. Spring arrived softly. The cherry blossoms along the streets of Portland bloomed almost overnight, bright, full, unapologetic. It felt symbolic. Like the city itself was reminding me that rebirth doesn't come in thunderclaps, but in petals and morning light. The adaptation deal was moving fast. I had signed with a screenwriter, Aisha Benton, a fierce, brilliant woman who called me the night she finished reading my manuscript. "Jennie," she said, "you don't just have a story. You have a revolution." I didn't respond right away. Because part of me still felt like the woman sitting at the kitchen table, holding that perfumed letter from Camille with trembling hands. That part hadn't disappeared, but it no longer defined me. Aisha sent the first draft of the pilot script 2 weeks later. I read it in one sitting, curled up under a quilt in the same study Ethan used to call my quiet cave. But now it wasn't quiet because of fear. It was quiet because peace lived here now. The final scene in the script mirrored the real climax of my story, the anniversary party. Aisha had written it with such raw truth that I wept as I read. The wife stands at the podium, facing a room full of people who once admired her husband. Her voice doesn't tremble. Her hands don't shake. She simply tells the truth, and lets the silence that follows say everything. I emailed her back with one sentence. That's exactly who I became. On a warm Sunday afternoon, I found myself walking along the Portland waterfront. Not in a rush. Not looking over my shoulder. Just walking. I stopped by a food truck, bought a cup of strawberry lemonade, and sat down on a bench. That's when I saw him. Ethan. He was thinner. His hair was grayer. The lines in his face were deeper. He looked like a man who had walked through fire, but not like someone who had survived it. He hadn't noticed me yet. He was sitting alone, staring at the water. No phone. No book. Just silence. I stood there for a moment, unsure if I should go. But then I walked over. "Ethan." He turned. And when he saw me, his face changed, not in anger. Not even regret. Just loss. "Jennie," he said, standing slowly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't come for you," I replied calmly. "Just the breeze." He gave a small, sad smile. "You look strong." "I am," I said simply. A long pause. Then, with an almost childlike tone, he asked, "Do you ever think about what we were?" I looked at him. Really looked. "Yes," I said. "I do. And I'm proud of the woman I was." She gave her all. She loved honestly. But you made her disappear. And now? I've brought her back. He nodded slowly. "I was wrong." "I know," I said. "But this isn't about you anymore." He looked away, then down, then back at me. "I lost everything. I tilted my head. No, Ethan. I did. You just finally realized it. And with that, I walked away. Not because I needed the last word, but because he no longer held any of them. Months passed. And with each one, my life bloomed further. The show was greenlit for production. The book tour expanded internationally. And The Woman I Left Behind, my second book, became a bestseller, translated into 8 languages. But the moment that hit hardest came on a Thursday afternoon in June. I received a letter in my P.O. box. No perfume. No flourish. Just a simple envelope with a child's handwriting. Inside was a folded drawing, crayon and marker. A girl in a cape standing on a stage. Below it were 5 words. You helped my mom leave. No name. No return address. Just impact. Just proof. Just purpose. Today, I'm 43. I live in a cozy craftsman home with a garden full of lavender and wild roses. I teach workshops on storytelling, healing, and power. I speak at women's conferences. I host small gatherings for women who've forgotten how to be seen. And every so often, when the wind is just right and the night is quiet, I take out that old envelope, the one Camille sent. I keep it not for pain, but as a reminder that sometimes the thing meant to break you is the thing that finally sets you free.